This conference will now be recorded.
Yep.
There we are. Right, recording. Okay, safety moment. Let's start with the safety moment, shall we? I'll share something that's happened to me this morning as a safety moment. And I don't expect you to read all the text. I just literally copy and pasted the log into this presentation. This morning, in the very early hours of this morning, there was a work site in East Midlands route with an engineering supervisor, and a controller of site safety was named on that engineering supervisor's pack with a telephone number. Simultaneously on Western route, there was another engineering supervisor who had the same controller of site safety and phone number on his pack. The engineering supervisor from the East Midlands route rang the number to say, I have my work site and therefore you can start your work, but rang the person on Western, who then proceeded to put large plant on the railway when it was open. Somebody noticed it and the machines were very quickly taken off the track. And luckily, a train wasn't heading towards the large plant, because if it had, there would have been a catastrophic collision. And I guess I'm not going to go into the where's and what's happened here. This will obviously be under investigation. But everywhere I go, I feel, and this is not a criticism, it's just a feeling, okay, that we get ourselves unconsciously into a position where we just think everyone else is going to keep us safe. Some of the barriers, the layers in the Swiss cheese model, they'll look after us. As long as somebody else does it, it's fine, I'll be okay. And that, just looking at what's happened in this event here, there was a number of interventions right through the planning stage, right through and to what happened this morning, where this wouldn't have happened, but it did happen. So we ended up with large on-track plant RRVs on the railway, with potentially a train coming towards them right beside an inaccessible place by the cliff and the railway and the water. It doesn't, and in a tunnel as well. It doesn't get much worse than that in terms of risk to our railway operations. So I just thought I'd share it with you, and there'll be more to come on this. There's quite a lot of work underway today, but I guess my invitation to everyone is be naturally suspicious, be naturally inquisitive, check safe work packs, check timings, check phone numbers, check safety critical communications, check everything and check it again. Because had all of these things been checked here, this would not have happened. And I guess if I reflect on my last 2 years leading the safety task force and 20 odd years before that in the railway industry, that rigor in planning and detail a really effective way of stopping bad things happening. So that's just my safety moment. I'll move on. Okay, I'm going to try and shrink some of the things on my screen because I've got an awful lot of things on my screen. But hopefully, Gilles, you can still see my presentation because a lot of the controls have disappeared.
Yep.
So this is my presidential address, and like I said, I'm going to use my own story really as a kind of a prompt to everyone. If I can do it, anyone can do it. I grew up literally about 2 miles from where I'm sat at the moment, and I went to school with a chap called Spike. And Spike's on the right here and I'm on the left. And I remember having a conversation in my primary school at Livingston and saying to Spike, what should we do when we leave school? And Spike, whose dad was the milkman in the village where I grew up, said, I'm going to be a chartered accountant. And I thought, what the hell is that? I don't even know what that is. But anyway, it sounds really good. And I went away and thought about it, and I thought I'm going to become a chartered engineer because I didn't really fancy the idea of being an accountant. So I'm just trying to think, where did my earliest memory come from of wanting to be a chartered engineer? And it was that. So there's me in the playground at Livingston Primary School. The primary school's still there, by the way. And Spike, incidentally, is a window fitter and has been since we left school here in Exmouth 32 years ago. He never became a chartered accountant, but he's still a friend of mine. So my father, who's in this photograph here at the top on the left, I remember having a conversation with my dad about what I was going to do when I leave school. And my dad said, you're going to go to university, that's what you're going to do. I've made up my mind, son, you're going there. And I thought, do you know what? I don't know if I fancy it. Because I had an older brother, I still have got an older brother, and he went through a difficult time at university and it didn't work out for him. And I thought, do you know what? I'm not sure I want to do that yet. And my mum's friend came round to the house with a copy of the local Exeter newspaper, which is still the local Exeter newspaper, called the Express and Echo, and said, in here is an advert for British Railways to become an apprentice. Why don't you try it? So I did. And I came second in the interview. And for those of you who've been around the industry for a bit, you may know a guy called Andy Crago. He was the guy that interviewed me from school. And I'm still in touch. In fact, I've been in touch with Andy today on this safety irregularity. But Andy's a really good chap, and gave me an opportunity. And the reason I say gave me the opportunity is the person who came first in the interview didn't want the job. So Andy rang me up and said, you didn't come first, but we're going to offer you the job. So I took it. I think in my mind, the point I guess I want to make there is you've got to take an opportunity. Life sometimes presents you with opportunities, and sometimes you've got to make your own opportunities. But when you get them, you've got to take them, and you've got to make the best of those circumstances that you can. So I didn't go to university. I did an apprenticeship, skills apprenticeship, artisan-based apprenticeship with British Railways. And originally, I started in Swindon, and certainly the first. I don't know if any of you are in Western House at the moment, but my letter of employment came from Western House some years ago now. But as the railways were coming towards privatisation, they'd split the traction rolling stock from on-track plant, and I liked the look of the yellow plant, so I went with the yellow plant. And I spent quite a bit of time fixing tampers, regulators, ballast cleaners, cranes, small plant. And I got to HND in mechanical and electrical engineering, looking after railway plant. And I've always enjoyed working with railway plant, if I'm honest, and I still do. Even when it breaks, I still enjoy it. And they're great machines, and they do great stuff. But as the railways were being privatised, the reality of the on-track plant fleet in what was British Rail, that then became Jarvis, the fleet size was shrinking, and a chap called John Williams, some of you will know John, but John's not with us anymore, sadly. John said to me, well, you're not a bad bloke. He said, why don't you come on to PWI renewals, and you can operate a tape measure, and you're technically minded, so you can come and do some PWI design and put some track in. And you can see a picture of me there. Incidentally, it's not recently, but I'm in the front of the photograph with my sunglasses on. And I am actually putting some drainage in at Whitmore Tunnel there, just on the approach to Whitmore Tunnel, and that's the downline we're stood in. But they were great times, and like Gilles mentioned at the start, we had some difficult times, obviously, but we had some great times, and certainly the ability to plan technically, survey, design, install, do drainage, site work, all that sort of good stuff was hugely rewarding in terms of we were making a difference. We were doing a hell of a lot of renewals, and it was good to be given that level of responsibility, I felt anyway. So when I came off the plant, I moved my kind of earn and learn one day a week at college. I did an HNC in civil engineering, so I was literally doing one day a week, and by that stage it'd been about 7 or 8 years. But I'd never lost sight of becoming a chartered engineer, and the railway is a really good place where you can earn money and learn simultaneously, and certainly that's my experience. And when I talk to others, they share similar recollections. And there was a time in the year about 2000 where the contract that we were working on fell into hard times. We stopped renewals, and it was restructured because it was losing money, and we were served redundancy notices. And I genuinely thought at that stage my railway career had finished, which I thought, well, now's the time, best time I'm going to have. I've got a little bit of money, and I went and spoke to Plymouth University and see if I could do a master's degree. a bachelor's degree rather, with honours in civil engineering. And they said, yeah, you've got to do a foundation year. I said, well, I don't want to do that because I know how to add up, I know how to take away, and I know how to survey and design. So why do I need to do a foundation year? So eventually they let me on. I didn't have to do the foundation year. But then what happened in that period is the Hatfield train crash happened. And my redundancy notice was revoked. I wanted to take it, if I'm honest, at the time, because I needed the money to do what I was going to do. But in fairness, John, who is not with us anymore, I had a good friendship with John. We had some difficult times as well, mind, but he was my boss. But I said to John, I would still like to work for the railway, but I still want to do my degree. How about we do some sort of deal whereby I work part-time and do my degree, and then I'll do surveying, designing and technical work and weekends and holidays and all that sort of good stuff. And he agreed to it. So I took an opportunity there, which was perversely thrown up by a catastrophic track failure. And I went to university at Plymouth and I did my bachelor's degree. Odd times, really. We were re-railing on midweek days on the main line, trying to remove gauge corner cracking. And I was able to do, on Wednesdays we had a short day at university, and I could go out to uni in the morning and go out and do re-railing in the afternoon. It was just unheard of, but it all kind of worked. So I did 3 years and did a civil engineering degree with honours at Plymouth, whilst doing all sorts of fun jobs, renewals jobs, such as Christmas at Swindon Station, where my Christmas lunch came from the garage around the back of the station, or we did Chalford, all the curves up through Chalford, and relayed both lines with concrete sleepers and things like that during that time. Anyway, when I finished my degree, I moved to work for Phil Ransom. Many of you know Phil, and Phil helped me as my SCE to become a chartered civil engineer. Phil was brilliant, as were many others, and gave me the opportunity to fulfill all the skills required to become a chartered engineer. And that's what I duly did. And what I was also doing, I was able to accredit prior experience. So if you look at, for those of you that are chartered engineers, by the IC that is, but you can still do the same with the PWI, because now the PWI can offer you a route to chartership. You can capture prior evidence in terms of signing off your attributes and development objectives. And that's exactly what I'd done. And obviously Phil helped me close the gap on the rest. So I became a chartered engineer. And that was in 2007, I became a chartered engineer. And I was really, my father died in 2007. In fact, my father died 4 weeks after I became a chartered engineer. When I got my certificate, in the photograph you can see on the bottom right. And I was really proud that nearly 17 years after I said, Dad, I'm doing something completely different and I'm not following what you said, I was able to take my dad to the Institution of Civil Engineers in London, and he was able to see me obviously become a chartered engineer. But sadly, 4 weeks later, he died. But for me, that was an immense moment of fulfillment in front of my father. But I didn't really stop there. And ever since, I've been a supervising civil engineer. And my pledge was there, and there still are. There are people that help me. My pledge is to help others. And there are people around where I have spent time and effort as their supervisors, and have taken people from university right the way through to chartered engineer and to fellowship now. And I still do that. In fact, Christos, who used to work in the track renewals office at Bristol, he sat his professional review on Monday, just gone. Jack, who works in Western House, rang me just before Christmas, and he had got his CEng accreditation after sitting his review in November. So I still take immense personal satisfaction from helping others, and I spend quite a lot of time doing that. What Phil gave me was a really good opportunity to establish myself as a chartered engineer. So Phil gave me the opportunity to look at the Western route as it was then with Wales, high-speed main lines, and say, then they're broken because they're really old and we need to renew them. And high output track renewals was inbound, as it were, not proven. And we tested and commissioned the kit in Margam, and then put it to work on the main line. The cleaner first between Reading and Didcot, and then obviously the track relay came not far behind that. But it was great to, at the time, to use this experience, and I use this as my chartered engineer's professional review as well. What did I do to what was my part in upgrading the Great Western main lines, 100 mile an hour plus main lines, using novel plant. The budget was huge for the kit. I think it was £100 million worth of equipment, but the renewals work bank, it amounted to 600 miles of work, between Cardiff and Paddington, and between Bromsgrove and Exeter, and the bits in between. So the railway gives you the opportunity, in my view, to prove to people at the ICE or indeed the PWI that you can be responsible with huge investment that needs to be channeled efficiently into infrastructure. So again, a key point there, that there's opportunities in the rail industry. After high output track renewals was well established, I went on to work on the Reading Station scheme, and I was the programme development manager there. And I still can't believe it. I go to Reading quite a lot. I was there last Friday, and you look at the station. I remember what was there before, and I also remember commissioning and working with the development team there, the track layouts, the fly under. It was going to be a dive under originally, but it's now a fly over, obviously. And I'd also sat with Grimshaw's, the architects in London, about looking at what can we do with the design on the station. I've still got in the room next where I'm sat now. I've still got some of the sketches from Grimshaw's in some of their material that they gave me. But I look at Reading now, and it's a built scheme. When I left Reading, we secured the funding from the DFT, and I still look at it now. I can't quite believe it's still there. Oh, sorry, not that it's still there. Can't believe it is there. And again, £1 billion scheme whereby the railway has given or gives us as engineers the opportunity to take huge responsibilities with infrastructure, complex infrastructure, and create benefits for people as civil engineers do. And after that, I came back to track renewals. I was the safety and assurance director for what was IP Track. We delivered £750 million worth of track renewals every year nationally. I went on then to become the client director. So basically, I signed all the checks to all of the contractors for track renewals. I set up the safety management systems, the ISOs 9, 14 and 18,001, the alliance contracts and all sorts of other stuff. But I also got to be on call and go out on site. So these sites here are all Western sites. And I'll make a £10 donation to charity if somebody at the end of this can guess where they all are. I won't leave that slide up there for too much longer, but for those of you who are paying attention, they're all Western sites, so you may know where they are. And then I spent time then, I moved from track renewals. I went to work for Mark Kahn as his chief of staff in London. I did that for just short of a year. Really fascinating to see, to experience the life of our executive. It was very challenging for me personally. Coming up or growing up through a railway where you're kind of tangibly linked to operations, maintenance, design and tangible things, you're then dealing with intangible things, politics, the media and all sorts of other insight and experiences that those people that operate at those levels have to be able to navigate. But it was fascinating to be a part of that and see what happens. Obviously, we've had a report recently, the creation of Great Britain's Railways. There's no shortage of political reports, and I dare say we'll have more. But when I was there were 3 different reports. The most prolific one was the Shaw report. But also when I was there, the Brexit vote happened. And I remember the kind of utter disbelief, not that this is a politically driven presentation, but the kind of disbelief, because Patrick McLaughlin was the transport minister, and then all of a sudden he wasn't the transport minister, and then Chris Graham was the transport minister. And there was another instance where some of the Scottish politicians were making some comments in papers about wanting to take over Network Rail Scotland, and Mark Kahn actually flew to Scotland and offered to give it to them, and then they wouldn't take it. But it was an interesting time nonetheless when you see our regulatory colleagues, the Department for Transport and the RSSB, the Rail Delivery Group. There are a number of different organisations in London, and in those organisations, there are a number of people that genuinely, and this is not being disrespectful, didn't have the experience in detailed railway operations. So I spent quite a lot of time of my time there just talking to people. You know, you get somebody from the Justice Ministry who's just got a job in the DFT, and you're trying to explain to them about railways. But these people hold huge influence and huge power, so it's important that we manage them in a very effective way. Right, I'll move on. Then I became the maintenance director for Western. So that when I came across, we had works delivery and maintenance, and at this time, or just prior to that time, I became a fellow of the ICE, also the PWI, and I also during this time became a chartered project professional. So I'm a chartered project manager as well as a dual certified chartered engineer. And I've always I'm not saying this to kind of peddle my own wares. It's just the opportunities that the railway affords, the experiences that you can get, and if you organise yourself with a structure of evidence collection and development, you know the world is your oyster inside the railway industry. So I love the job as Western Maintenance Director, and it still is my substantive job now, albeit I'm on the Safety Task Force. And you know, to look after 2,200 miles of railway every day, 110 million pounds worth of spend, or it was then. When I started, it had 100 million pounds worth of works delivery, a team size of about 1,500 people. And during the time I was there, obviously GWEP was in full flight, as was Oxford and Bristol resignaling and others, and the introduction of new rolling stock to interface with this railway system. So it was a hugely rewarding role. What I wanted to do is leave behind a legacy of a railway that's more proactive in terms of the way we inspect and manage activities, so that we keep our track workers safe. And obviously, if we're proactive, you would like to think that our assets do what you expect of them. So we did things like, for instance, 1,400 miles of plain line pattern recognition, introduced that, more intelligent infrastructure, more risk-based maintenance, and things like eddy current from the UTU fleet, and basically restructured the maintenance team, because the maintenance team hadn't changed for about 10 years, but the railway running around it, through it, across it, had definitely changed. Electrification, resignaling, modern equipment, all that sort of thing. So I was really, I was happy in that job. It still is my substantive job, although I'm not doing it. And I still do Western Route exec on call, which I am this week. So I'm still intrinsically linked to Western. I've got an affiliation, I guess, or a connection with Western that's quite, runs for many years. But then this happened. On the 3rd of July 2019, Gareth and Spike were struck and killed in South Wales on the main line, working under an unofficial lookout system, doing a task that didn't need to be done. And the more I say that, I just think, what an absolute shame that that I have to say that. But I was asked to take on and set up the Safety Task Force, which I've got to say, at the time I knew what to do, but the railway is hugely habitual, political, anecdotal, in fact. And it took me about 6 weeks of really thinking long and hard about how to approach this, and talking to Andrew Haynes and Martin Frobisher and Mark Langman before I finally agreed to do the job. And it's not about money, it's about leadership, it's about resolve, it's about commitment, it's about all of those things that you need to do in order to change the way that the railway is. We're not particularly good at changing. We're really, really good at not changing. So anyway, I took on the Safety Task Force in August of 2019. And since then, and I'll go on to the stats about you get what you focus on, just a couple of points, just going back to my opening safety moment about just when you think everything's fine, it's not fine. In April of 2020, Aidan Ashurst was struck and killed at Northampton. He'd handed back a line block. Now, if you look through this millennium, if you look at track worker fatalities, there are generally two clear areas. 80% of them are killed working with lookouts or human forms of lookout, and 20% of them become geospatially disorientated. In other words, they end up somewhere where they shouldn't be. And that is genuinely the two, if you're going to target your efforts, that they are the two places. So this slide, you can almost see it in this slide. In fact, if you look at the proportions, we've got three people that have been killed with lookouts, and one that ended up in a place where he shouldn't have been. So Aidan handed back a line block and then went down the outside of a Vortop fence, or the live side of the Vortop fence. Speaking with the investigators, there was an inference that it might have been COVID related, because if you look at the date, April 2020, COVID was just it was in full flight, or initially in full flight, and there were people working behind the Vortop fence. So what better way of giving yourself social distancing than walking down the live side of the Vortop fence? Only that there was a train coming towards Aidan, and he was sadly struck and killed. So the things that the Safety Task Force have done generally is focusing on the reduction of human forms of lookout and putting barriers in place to stop people becoming disorientated, or indeed in a place where they shouldn't be. A year ago next week, Tyler Byrne was struck and killed at Surbiton. Tyler was working under a lookout system, and the investigation report for that will come out. But it unfortunately proved the point about how lethally dangerous lookout working can be. When you look at Surbiton, there are 5 lines there. It's an extremely busy railway layout, and third rail electrified. And in my mind, I'm just trying to think, what would I do? What would I be happy with doing in terms of going on near the line? I would not be happy being put to work inspecting the 10-foot crossovers of a third rail, really busy railway where there are 5 railway lines in the layout. But my attitude to risk is different to others. But what happened after Tyler was sadly struck and killed, we rapidly increased the removal of lookout working. I'll come on to that in a minute. So if you look at near misses in this control period, the bit in the middle with the red circle around it is lookout related. If you look over the same sample size, 13% of the work that we do is with lookout or lookout operated warning systems, yet over 60% of the near misses involve lookouts. So there was an obvious statistical place to start. And you can also see, as you go up with speed as well, things start to get a little bit more risky. So basically what we've done nationally is really focus on the removal of lookout and louds working, and certainly high speed layouts. And we've had quite a lot of success. So in the task force, we set ourselves 3 main goals. 3 main goals. One is no more lookouts. The other one is 100% additional protection, or indeed train activated warnings. And the third one is 100% compliance to standard 019. And those 3 targets remain the same today. We want to have no more lookouts, and we're nearly there. We want to additionally protect, or indeed have much more robust warning systems for track workers. And then standard 019, which in its essence is beautifully simple, but we've made it extremely complicated. We want people to comply with it. So basically, plan work with competent people, capture that plan, a responsible manager approve the plan, authorize the plan, communicate it with someone who's going to deliver the plan, make sure you've reduced risk in the planning stage, do the plan, deliver the work, and feed back. And certainly if you look at the work we're going to do next with the standard 019 and the roles within standard 019, it's just about to change to become a lot simpler and not before time. We spent an awful lot of time talking to our frontline, frontline colleagues. Change is difficult. It creates victims if you're not careful. And I've spent an awful lot of time out on the front line, talking to people, listening to anecdotes, trying to pick up insight on what the right thing to do is, and also spending time communicating the way that we are going, and more importantly, why. You know, there are people, although I hear much less of it now, that would say, look out working, it's absolutely salted here, I've done it for 30 years, no problem here. But then Gareth and Spike had done it for 40 years, and their wives were retiring as widows, and their daughter was walking up the aisle, or one of their daughters was walking up the aisle without their dad. So we should never ever be complacent, ever. We should know what our risk numbers are and then methodically reduce or remove it. But we should communicate that as well and involve people in how we reduce and remove risk. And we spent a lot of time with that in the task force. We've done some basic things, and there's still much more to do here. So simple things like access points and walkways. If you have separated walkways and good access points, you don't need to work nights. You don't need line blockages to walk up the railway. And you can do things whenever you want without disrupting the train service or loading up signal workload with line blockages and things. So we spent a lot of time focusing on the resurrection of walkways. There's still an awful lot more to do in this space, by the way. And we've also switched on much more eddy current for rolling contact fatigue, and also 3,000 miles more plain line pattern recognition than when compared 2 years ago, and things like the S&C inspection trains that have just been released from Derby, which can run in traffic and pick up geometry measurements, unattended geometry measurements, and very high definition CCTV footage. So we are innovating as fast as we can in an industry that doesn't always innovate very fast, in order to remove human beings from needing to be on the railway, but obviously not putting that risk into the asset. And there's more to do, but we're making progress. Drones, incidentally, if someone can name the picture on the right hand side here under the drone, I'll increase my charitable donation to 15 of my hard-earned pounds. But Western are leading the way with drone trials, and Liam Barrington, who works on the route, he used to work as a technician in Exeter Central. One day he spoke to me, I don't know if Liam's on here, and said, wouldn't it be great if I could mix my hobby up with my work and fly drones for a living? And that's exactly what he's doing now. He's doing a good job of it. So there are many more methods, some which we obviously know and some which we need to develop, will enable us to keep assets safe and inspected without putting human beings in the way of trains that are moving. And we must develop those options. Excuse me a second. Right, something's happened to my screen now. Gio, can you see a geofencing slide? Can you see that?
Yeah, we can see that, Nick.
Yes, flickering around on my screen. Sorry, that's why I asked. And it's still flickering. Can you see now?
No, it's back to your first slide.
That's interesting. I don't know why it's doing that. There you go. Anyway, I don't know why it's doing that, but anyway, I wasn't even touching the screen or the keyboard. But anyway, so another thing, obviously, to protect track workers from becoming geospatially disorientated, we've developed 3 systems, trialed 3 systems, geofencing, which basically put a virtual wall around where you work adjacent line open. And this is novel technology. Is it really novel? I don't think it is really novel, but it's relatively novel to the rail industry. But it's available now. We're consulting with our unions. The next meeting's on the 17th of February, but it does work. A lot of the trials were done on Western. I went out myself, and we were able to geofence isolation limits in one layer, adjacent line open in one layer, plant operations in a different layer, so that you get warnings as a track worker when you come to the limit of safe areas. Now, I think it's a really, certainly at the east end of the Western patch, I'd certainly be using this. It's very valuable. And just thinking about things, I said earlier on about railway customs and practices, anecdotes. If I had £1 for every anecdote that I've heard, in the last 2 years, I'd be rich. If I'd had £1 for everyone I've had in my railway career, I wouldn't be here, because obviously the railway, is steeped in tradition and anecdote and strongly held beliefs, some of which are nonsense when you look at risk and fact. So basically, what does this graph tell you here? So in the top left-hand side, we have reduced unassisted lookout working now by 98%. Okay, so the top graph is unassisted lookout working reduction 98%. If you look on the right-hand side, near misses have come down by over 75% simultaneously after having been static for years. Okay. If you look at the frequency between near misses, if you normalize it by hours recorded, again, we were doing about 900,000 hours between near misses when we started on the task force, and we're now doing over 3 million hours worked between near misses. But we're still having near misses. In fact, there was a fairly decent one on Western at Western-super-Mare last week. So we should never think that we've got this sorted, because we haven't. If you come down the left-hand side, what you'll see there is signaller workload, and that's the number of line blocks that are taken by hour of the day. And you'll see that on Tuesday, Wednesdays and Thursday mornings, the signallers are really busy. And then one of the anecdotes here is the signallers always say no to a line block. Well, if you plan to go on the railway when the signallers are busy, don't be surprised if they say no. But we are introducing a new line blockage planning system. It's being rolled out in the central route now, but it'll be out in every route by about October this year. That enables you to book line blockages a little bit like you book plane tickets. Really, you can't book them if they're not there. So that will help to spread planning behaviour and rostering behaviour so that we don't peak the workload in the mornings. If you look below that heat map, you'll see when do our operational close calls and near misses happen, and it's midweek mornings. Midweek mornings are an absolutely right time in terms of proportions to have near misses, operational close calls. And I am afraid to say the majority of our fatalities happen on midweek mornings. Surbiton, Road and Margam, and there are many others. So midweek mornings should be a real focus point for everyone. How can we reduce signal workload so that we do not have to work in high risk situations or higher risk situations? How can we plan to be inside T3 possessions, which are a lot safer than line blockages, and line blockages are a lot safer than lookouts? So there's some fairly clear statistics on the safest systems of work, but I do recognise you can't always work in a T3 possession to do everything you want to do. The bottom graph is actually hours worked in Network Rail by maintenance staff. So basically, along the bottom of the graph, you'll see 24 hours in a standard clock, and then the actual line itself shows you the proportion of labour resource that we put to work through the 24-hour clock. So what it shows you is the first bit is nights, and then there's a slight reduction in the proportion of hours worked as the shift changes over at 6 in the morning. And then you see we roster 2/3 of our people during the day, and then we haven't got many people in the afternoon. And basically, I use this slide to change planning behaviour and rostering behaviour, because we roster all of our people to work, not all, sorry, we roster a significant proportion of our people to work in midweek afternoons midweek mornings, when we've got opportunities that are safer to work in the afternoon. So there's an opportunity there to get safer if you want to do work in the safest possible way, and I'd implore you all to do that. So that is my final safety slide, which is you get what you focus on. Know your numbers, know your risk, plan better, avoid risks, and what will happen then is you'll get what you wish for, which is obviously what we all want in terms of safety risk reduction. I'm now going to come on to the last bit of my presentation, and I'll open up for some questions then. Just some thoughts for the PWI. The graph on the left-hand side is our railway revenue graph since COVID, and you can see it was accurate up until just before Christmas, so I'll renew it once I get the January report through. We've taken a massive wallop when it comes to revenue in the industry and journeys in the industry, and that should be a point of interest for every single person in the railway industry, because if you look at the question at the bottom, during COVID, the three biggest draws on the public purse were the NHS, the furlough scheme, and the railway industry, which is unsustainable, clearly unsustainable. So we obviously, and certainly with the restrictions finishing this week, hopefully we'll see a return to traffic and people back in offices and things like that, starting from next week. But we can't assume that all the traffic's going to come back, because there's probably people like me sat behind the computer screen thinking, I quite like this, so I don't have to spend so much time at work. So we need to be different. The graph on the right hand side is the type of traffic or revenue that's returned, and revenue has returned hugely quickly on the railway. And for those of you that plan major engineering works, when we used to disrupt bank holidays and all that sort of good stuff, weekends, we should be really thinking about, is that the right time to disrupt the railway? And I think we should have much more in-depth debate about when is the least worst time to do work on the railway, and just accept the fact that it may not be like it used to be. And therefore, we could then plan work possibly in a more efficient way for the cost of capital expenditure, but also generate opportunities to return revenue quicker. So just some thoughts there. Revenue is down, big style. Some of it may never come back, and the way in which it's come back is different to what we'd have expected. And therefore, what does that present us with in terms of opportunities in order to deliver our work safely and effectively, but also maximise revenue for the railway industry? And I haven't got all the answers, by the way. Another thing from the PWI, for me to everyone, is this picture shows me, and it shows 7 previous PWI presidents. I've actually got another one since then with 8 in, but even so, the point is still the same. There's 8 there. I've got one with 9. I beg pardon. There are a lot of white males, and there's Joan, and we all know Joan because Joan obviously was working with us in Bristol for years. For those of you who know Joan, Joan's amazing. She works for the PWI now, but we have got more to do to generate the next, or to develop the next generation of rail engineers that has got diversity and inclusion right at its core. Okay, and in fairness, the PWI are following the Royal Academy of Engineers guidance to do this. The PWI is it's not massively over-resourced at all. It's got to run, with a very modest budget, and therefore turning the diversity inclusion stats around. You can't do it literally overnight. You've got to do it in a sensible and sustainable and progressive way. So that, I guess my key thoughts are here is that yes, we are aware of this. We should all be massively proud of the history of the PWI. In my hand, I don't know if you see it, but I'll show you in a minute. I've got the PWI President's badge here in my hand. I've also got the gavel in my hand, and we've got a huge base of experience, friendship, and history that we can all rely on. But the future, we need to develop the future, and it'll be different. Okay, and that's up to us. And just as an anecdote, the PWI ran a course, one of the first OHLE courses, I might add, in early November. And inside Network Rail on our social media internal channel, I picked up some feedback that one of our instructors in the PWI had referred to the group as the lads, but there was a lady in it, and she was right. The lady was right to pick it up. It was. I'm sure it was an innocent comment, but nonetheless, it excludes certain parts of our of our teams and our membership, and it should not do that. So I was able to pick up on it very quickly and offer an apology in the same classroom where this happened very quickly, but it served as a really good wake-up call that we must develop diverse and inclusive engineers for the future, and be an organisation that drives this, that is not driven to do it. Okay, and there's more in this space to do, obviously. A couple of slides left to go, then I can open up for questions. we've got the lowest carbon form of transport, and we can get it lower, and therefore there's a huge opportunity here, but we've got to realise it. We've got to make sure that we can electrify and renew railways at a modest cost. Otherwise, you know, going back to the revenue challenge, the future will be stark for railways. So a huge opportunity for us here to create a lower carbon form of transport than we already have. We've got the COP26 recently in Scotland that, you know, in terms of providing a natural solution to low carbon transport. We are it, unless of course we choose not to be that. And I would ask everyone to really think about what can we do to provide a low cost, efficient and lower carbon railway. And there are all sorts of things that we can do if we focus on it. And this slide kind of iterates that point, you know, more electrification, developing more resilient assets, not at massive cost either, and obviously developing battery, hydrogen solutions and the infrastructure to support such things. And finally, my final little slide, I've got some feedback from our leaders to the PWI. What do we need to think about? Incidentally, the PWI are submitting representations to the listening group for GB Railways. We've been approached. There is a request for information from GB Railways, and the PWI, as our other engineering institutions, I might add, we are providing insight and feedback or feed forward even into GB Railways. But some things here, just a thought. Do permanent way engineers balance operational risk when they're applying TSRs? And when this person is an executive director of Network Rail, has the opinion that we're very good at managing track risk, but then do we actually think about operational risk when we put speed on, putting on boards, lowering boards? So basically asks for more balanced risk decision making when it comes to putting speeds on. Again, another one here, can we innovate more so that we're less constrained by numerous standards? Opportunity there perhaps. How do we automate track maintenance so that we don't need to put track works in the path of trains? And the railway needs to be more attractive now than ever before, with the context being COVID. How can we delight through designing, procuring, installing and maintaining a much more reliable railway? And that came from a very senior level within Network Rail. And the next one was from Andrew Haynes. Please remember that we are a business. So every hour that we shut the railway, we have zero revenue, but the fixed costs are the same. So we should be passionate about how we manage access, and we should not stop access to our railway. So the general themes there are, you know, risk reduction, risk balance, simplification, and remember, without customers, we're all out of a job. So we've got to focus on it. And that's it. For those of you that would like to, I've got an active presence on LinkedIn. By all means, click on there. If you'd like to follow what I do, I quite often release material about the PWI, but also the Safety Task Force and other things. And that's a fairly good way of keeping up with things that I'm up to. But on that note, Gilles, I'm going to try and get out of this presentation without cutting myself off.
Brilliant, thanks, Nick.
And I think I've done it. I don't know.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's all good. Yeah. I watched your little video that you did where you did this visit at Derby. It was a very interesting one, actually. I encourage people to go and watch your channel and pick up those videos.
Yeah, there's quite a few there. Yeah.
Okay.
So there we are.
Right. Any question from the floor? Please just put your name in the chat if you want to ask a question to Nick.
I can see some people on the screen here that need to be chartered engineers through the PWI. And those people know who I'm referring to. I won't name people, by the way. But I would imagine if there were cameras on, they'd be laughing at me now.
Mr. Lake, Nick, you want to come in?
Hey.
Hello, Nick.
Hey, Nick, how are you?
Very well, thanks. You?
I'm very well, yeah.
Okay, the question is really about requirements, and is the Safety Task Force going to potentially get to a point where it generates requirements for safe by design features? Whilst I think most projects, certainly the ones I've been involved in, it is inherent in the thinking to provide safety features. Sometimes that proactive thinking can be curtailed by, you know, available budget, etc., etc.
So I guess a few things there, Nick. If you look at our major projects that have go through the peer review process, I'm a major project peer reviewer, and I've been since IP track days. I was able to intercept that process, so there are deliberate checks and balances now on major projects with regard to developing of requirements in order to keep track workers safe, to make sure that we haven't just, I say, value managed out work, that we've done it in a way that it is the right way. Also, some of our system definition documents need to be updated, and there's some work underway with that, but it's not complete. But a lot of this, Nick, is I think we are railway people with a vast degree of experience. Walkways, access, separation from risk. A lot of this CDM has been busy in this space since 1994, and we should have been doing it for a long time. So you know, and I know, Nick, we've probably talked numerous times over many years about, you know, with a design you can put in point smokes on the right side so that you don't end up in the 6 foot and things like that. So there is lots of things that we can all do, but also, like I said, there are a set of basic, dare I say, a checklist, and there's nothing wrong with checklists. But things like safe access walkways, things like intelligent infrastructure, so we don't need to maintain things as often or inspect things as often. All of those things, and also the other thing as well is operational use. I mean, bi-directional working is hugely expensive to engineer in, isn't it? But when you actually think of it over the life of an asset, if you've got good bi-directional working, you can high output renew, ballast clean without you know, too much disruption, as it were. But there's always more to do in this space with developing scope, I think, that is modest but reasonable in order to keep the you know, we've got to think about signalers as well. You know, there are places, London Bridge is a good one, lockout devices, where we can, you know, they were put there with good intent to enable patrollers, inspectors, to basically lock out the signalling system so they can do but they're in, and Milton Keynes Station's another one. There are lockout devices where you almost get killed getting to the lockout device. Never right. So a lot of it is basics, and we don't need a specific suite of space age requirements. The very simplest thing I would say is how do we maximise separation between track workers and trains, or indeed track workers going on the track. And certainly with what you see coming through with intelligent infrastructure now and some of the technology that we've got, it's not next, it's now. You know, there's quite a lot of stuff that's happening now that we can use, and certainly for big projects, just something as simple as switching on the RBM regimes as soon as you've renewed an asset. All around the country we've done, well, you know, Nick, because you've done loads of them, vast amounts of renewals in the last 20 years. We've got concrete barrier layouts, but we haven't, and we've got good geometry, mostly anyway. But we've still got inspection regimes that haven't been risk based. So there's always more that we can do.
Yeah. Okay.
Any more questions?
Thank you, Nick. Yeah, Rob Masford. Rob, nice to see you
hi
here.
guys, how you doing? You all right?
All good, Rob. How are you?
Good. Yeah, not too bad, mate. Yeah. So my question is about the sort of the longevity of the sort of safety task force and the current thinking behind it. Really, is it? We've often failed where we come up with a project to improve something, and then we end up going back to the old ways, as you mentioned earlier. The sort of the establishment, really, going back to what it knows or thinks it knows best. And again, from what Nick just sort of said about, you know, delving into sort of safety by design, there's lots of areas I think where it needs to be a continual improvement of all different elements of the business. So, you know, is it a thinking that the safety task force won't be just a task force, but it will be something that will continue for the long term?
So Network Rail are developing or implementing something called the safety framework, which kind of follows the devolution journey. Is Nick going to be forever in this job? No. Are we all safety leaders in our own right? Absolutely we are. And is there more to do in the near future, next 12 months? You know, the safety task force will be here at least until next March. Okay, and that's not to say that we're going to disappear then. There's other things that as a for instance, we've been asked to look at how do we remove detonator protection.
Yep.
You know, what technical solutions can we, basically geofencing for trains? How do we keep trains out of workspaces?
Yep.
Which will help with, you know, efficiency with work times, as well as keeping possession support staff off the railway. So there are other things all the time coming through, but currently, if I can do nothing else other than enable other people to lead with safe decisions, to have the kind of courage to challenge, lead decisively. You know, all of us here, and certainly my year in the PWI is all about this. You know, I look around the screen here now, and there are loads of you here that have influence over loads of people and loads of infrastructure, and you'll get what you focus on. If you focus on something else, you won't get the safe outcomes. But I know there are people here. You know, you look at Nick Matthews, the focus on the 125-mile-an-hour handbags, fantastic. Yeah, because there was real focus. And there are others of, you know, I look around the screen as well. Andy Bartlett, high up at Track Renewals, adjacent line open on Western, and more. Obviously, I've just kind of picked 2 names out of the hat there. But really, our job, all of our job, is to drive this all of the time and multiply our collective efforts. So will there always be somebody upstairs called a safety task force doing this sort of stuff? I hope not. It will be a failure if we have got that. But I recognise in the short term, medium term, perhaps, having an organisation that can disrupt positively is probably what we need right now, and there's more to do yet.
Yep. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Nick. Tony, you mentioned that you work with Nick. Do you want to come and explain your comments here in the chat?
Tony is a legend of the task force.
Thank you. I'll put my camera on as well. There you go. Thanks, Jill. Yeah, I was just adding to what Nick said about what we're doing in the task force, and I get Rob's question about you know, about keeping up the momentum. But for me, and I think it's one of the principles that we've tried to embrace in the task force, is about undertaking the change in the way so that people are make the right decisions and they've got that right mindset. You know, it's almost, as Nick said, if we carry on long-term supporting everybody, it sort of defeats the object. It's more about helping people to improve now, almost give a man a fish sort of approach. So that's how I see the work that we're doing with the routes, is about changing their mindsets, changing their ways of thinking, changing how they make the decisions, so that you've got more of a sustainable change.
Even this morning, I went onto a conference call this morning, and it might have been a kind of slip on words or whatever. You know, I don't think it was disingenuous, but someone said, "Nick, your team have got to do this," and we're like, "No, we haven't. You have." And by the way, we mean it, and we'll be watching and we'll be helping, obviously. But I genuinely, without kind of slopey shoulders or anything like that, because we haven't shied away from some very difficult conversations in the last 2 years. We want to, so Tony was with us on a journey in IP track, and many of you here were in IP track when ISO 914 and 18001, the British Safety Council, Swords of Honour. I don't think anyone believed that was possible in 2012-13, but you can do it if you focus on it. Our job here is to enable people to focus on these things, and then the right outcomes will happen. So that's, you know, I think what our legacy I'd like us to feel is that we've helped people grab things, lead it and drive it. Albeit we've had some quite interesting conversations over the last 2 years, but that'll be in my memoirs, which I'll publish for a charitable cause at some stage. Incidentally, does anyone recognise those photos? Nick, I reckon you did the design on some of them. No pressure.
Yeah, there's a possibility, Nick.
Nick, I've got a question. You mentioned in your presentation the risk to asset. Could you outline what work you're doing at the moment to try to understand what the reduction in necessity lookout working, about the risk to asset, and how we're trying to mitigate that?
It's a really good question, Gilles. Anecdotal statements on risk transfer are the enemy of making tangible change. Very important that you listen to everything I said. They're anecdotal. Since in the first 4 or 5 months, in fact, Tony, we replay this often, and we've replayed it often recently. We did a lot of work with the heads of maintenance about things like asset compliance. What happens if you've got people stood on one side of the railway trying to get to the other because we can't cross the line? Signal workload. What happens to signal workload? Operational close calls. Geometry. What happens if you can't do manual correction of geometry, and what happens over time? And the truth is, there is always the potential for risk transfer. But we've had people come to us and say, because of the safety task force, we can't do this. And then when you get in amongst it and go and have a look at it, there's something else at play, really. And I won't necessarily cite instances, but there are a number of times where I've gone, okay, that's interesting, let me come and have a look then. So you're using us as a reason for you not doing what you should be doing anyway, which is planning better, keeping your track workers safe, investing in access points, keeping vegetation away from certain things. I don't buy that. So there's a number of times where we've had to go into routes and have a chat, honest conversation about an anecdotal allegation that the safety task force has done this. However, on the flip side of it, risk transfer is real. If you look at, we've had spikes in operational close calls because certain, and the anecdote was, oh, that safety task force has done that. But then when you actually locally investigate all of those things, COVID, new signallers, signalling underload because of 6 timetable changes with actual defined cause, but we were used as the kind of anecdotal reason. But having said that, I would not be bold and stupid enough to say it's nothing to do with us. We have removed 31,000 hours a week of lookout working. 31,000 hours a week, okay? And we don't, and neither could we either. Manual geometry correction, where you need Cobra and ear protection on open railways, you're not allowed to do that anymore. And I've had loads of people come to me and say, oh yeah, well, if only we could just do this thing that suits their roster pattern, then it would all be fine. But then when you actually look at the roster pattern, there's scope in it to change the roster. So there is a real risk of transfer. We have got very well documented arrangements that have been overseen by the RSSB, certainly for the last 11 months. And prior to that, and when I say 11 months, after Tyler was struck and killed, we went up a gear, and therefore the RSSB helped us. But prior to that, we obviously had the risk transfer items. But we continue to be vigilant, and certainly with the RSSB work, there are 105, I think it was, potential hazard areas that could transfer. What happens if you're working near third rail at night, because you're working at night now on the third rail, not during the day? And I could go on and on, many other things. But for each of those things, where the risk was identified locally, we've got control measures documented, but I'd never say it's bulletproof, because the railway's a big old beast and there's plenty of things happen day in, day out. And we've just got to carry on. Going back to where I started on the very first safety moment, eyes in the back of our head, check, check, challenge, check, challenge, check again. Because we're upsetting a system here. And when systems are upset, they sometimes do things you don't expect. Okay.
Yes, thank you, Nick, for this response. I think we're just going to come to the end of the sessions. So one thing I would like to add, really, Nick kindly volunteered me or proposed me a little while ago to do a presentation to SNCF on the work of the safety task force. So it was quite interesting for me because it was actually complicated to speak in French and describe, all what we do in the UK system. I just haven't got the vocabulary. But I had great fun with a lady called Laurence Medina. And
you've done a much better job than me. I would have been really lost.
Yeah, no, Laurence was great, and I was trying to fill the question, but that was quite an interesting experience. But is to say that actually, the repercussion of what you're doing, Nick, as part of your work safety task force, is actually of interest to France and other European countries. So there was a lot of interest, a lot of questions around how we managed to do that, what's driven our decisions, and what was the impact, and what was the problem. So so that was quite an interesting presentation in the fact that.
Thanks for doing
it. yeah, you're welcome. Okay, so I think enough said for today. Just to thank you very much, Nick, for coming back, 2 years after your first presentation to the West of England section on your data. It was a very interesting update. On behalf of everybody here today, I'd like to give you my thanks.
Thank you. Thanks. And
okay,
there's a lot of people involved in the safety task force work, far too many to mention. And there are some people that are genuinely really challenge themselves to do things that they did not want to do. And that is one of the hardest things, but for one that I'm extremely grateful. I could say thank you to thousands, genuinely thousands across the country that have really, really shifted this by challenging themselves. Difficult.
Okay, thank you, Nick. And the last thing for me is in 4 weeks' time, I'll be delighted to welcome Molly Evans to talk to us about Bristol East Junction renewals. I know the talk has been done elsewhere, but you haven't seen it. I suggest you come along for two reasons. Molly is really, really good. She's good at presenting, and Bristol East Junction is one of the major projects we've had on our patch. It's certainly had a lot of attention. So please join us again in 4 weeks' time, and I wish you all a very good afternoon.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.